My name is Sara Jenkins, and I am here to tell you about this lesson called Grandparents Around the World. It is for a first grade classroom, and it'll probably take about one class period to do. Reason why I chose this is someday I would like to be a grandparent, and I also have noticed that grandparents are playing a lot more in the role of bringing and taking children to and from school. The overview is, it doesn't matter what you call your grandmother and grandfather, it's the bond between you that counts. And the purpose of this lesson is so that students will learn the names of grandparents around the world, and it's how they like to spend time with their own grandmother and or grandfather. The materials that you'll need include two books written by Ashley Wolf. I call my grandma Nana, and I call my grandpa Papa. Here's the first one. And here's the second one. And then, depending on what you feel your students would use better, either colored crayons, pencils, and or markers. And then you also need some colored dots used to stick on a map. And then any type of wall map. It could be Arizona, United States, world maps that you can display on the wall. And you know your students best as to which map would work best with your students. The objectives include the students will be able to identify on a map where their grandparents live, 2, compare and contrast backgrounds, traditions, and customs of their grandparents, and 3, express clearly ideas and feelings about their grandparents in writing. Procedure. So, before you do this lesson, it's really important that you realize that this could be a sensitive issue. Whenever you're working with families, doing family trees, you need to remember that some people might not have grandparents, or that's just not in their families. And basically, for those that don't have grandparents in their lives, allow them to substitute any family friends or whomever they like. Procedures. So what you do is you bring your students to your big carpet rug and you ask them what they call their grandparents. And while you're doing that, write the names down on chart paper. And there you can see a photo of my grandparents on my mother's side, and they were from Sweden. And so that would be my mummer and my papa. And I have wonderful memories of taking long road trips to go visit them. And then on my father's side, my father is from Oklahoma, and so his mother and father would be called Mama and Pampa. And what was interesting is my Mama and Pampa always called me Sara, and my Mama and Papa didn't like the name Sarah or Ruth, and so they always called me Beth, which made for confusion when we were visiting our relatives in Sweden. So what I'd like to do is just read a couple pages from the book. I call my grandpa Papa. Okay. My grandfather came from China, is visiting today. Class, please welcome Yi Yi, said Miss Alexandra May. Our grandpas all have stories. No two are just the same. They have so much to teach us and deserve their special names. Will you please tell Yi Yi about these pictures that you drew of you and all your grandpas and what you love to do? Cesar said, "Let me go first. See us swimming in the pool? My abuelo taught me how to dive. I think he's really cool." And then next, what you'll do is you'll ask your students where their grandparents live. Now, when I have been working in first grade and the primary grades, there's usually a packet that teachers send home on a weekly basis, and one thing you might want to have is have them write down where their grandparents live. Otherwise, depending on your students, some students I know are very aware of where their parents are, and some parents might be just knowing if their parents live near or far away, or if they live in Arizona or outside Arizona. In other words, they may not be able to name the actual state where their grandparents live or country where they actually live. So you might just want to have a map of Arizona and state if they are in or out, or again, it's all relative to what works for them. Then you assist them in putting a sticky dot on the appropriate map and have students look for a pattern in the dots. Are there more from one place than another? And discuss that grandparents can live far and near to their grandchildren. Grandparents can reflect many places in the world by the activities they do, the foods they eat, and the names they are called. So, after you're done, you have the students come back to their desk and you distribute primary paper. It's the paper that usually it's newsprint, and it has room for a picture at the top and lined writing space at the bottom. But I know some teachers like to Xerox their own paper for that too. Tell students that they are going to write what they like to do with a grandparent, and then they will draw an illustration of this activity. Now realize that they might have 4 or more grandparents. So you might have to just focus on one today and work on some of the others. You work that out as you see fit. And then when the session is done, have them share their activities orally. And I love it, and the kids really love it too, when they can bring their pictures and put it under the dot cam and then stand up in the front and then explain their picture. If you are worried that they might be embarrassed, just have a couple of them go up at the same time, and that works too. Have the students recognize the similarities and differences, and yet everyone likes doing something with their grandparent. For the assessment, check the writing. Now remember, this is first grade, and first grade at the beginning of the year is different than first grade at the end of the year. So you're going to look for their conventions, capitalizing people, punctuation, spelling. And then for social studies, while they're given their presentation, you've got your seating chart there, and you can keep track of who actually participated in the classroom discussions. And as they're actually giving their presentation, they can see if they said what their grandparents were called and where they lived and what they like to do with their grandparents. Extensions for this, you could celebrate Grandparents' Day or Children's Day by inviting grandparents to school. And then what I always like to do after you've shown them on the bulletin board is put them in a book, and then they can look at this book throughout the year, but make sure you give those papers back to the kids because the grandparents are going to want them. And then the map or maps can be used for math activities, including fractions, how many out of how many, and use that for their math extensions.